Season 6 of The Crown has just been released, and we're now at the final season. With most of the last season building up towards the event of Diana's death, this season was primarily focused on the 8-week period that led to the nation finding out that Diana had died. With Diana's death being the main event of the season, I've compared what was shown in the show to the actual true events to see how similar it was. So let's jump into this season and explain all that there was to take away from it. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Diana's death. This season of the show opened up on the evening of the death of Diana, when the events occurred from the perspective of a civilian walking their dog at night. We saw the infamous tunnel and a car travelling at great speed being chased by motorbikes before hearing a large crashing noise. In the penultimate episode of this first part of Season 6, we saw the same events occur, but from the perspective of Diana. We'd seen in the build-up to this the interest that the paparazzi had and their almost stalking nature and the inability to leave her be. With William going out and killing his first stag and becoming a hunter, it was the polar opposite to his mother, who was the prey that was being hunted by the paparazzi. So I feel like it was a real subtle reference and a metaphorical description of the difference in the two lives. The show really leaned in on the uncomfortable nature and the lack of escapism that Diana was going through, with the constant bombardment from people, the flashing lights, people shouting, cameras going off, and the sheer noise and claustrophobic nature that was present due to being cramped into a car or refined to an apartment because she couldn't move without there being loads of attention. Even the whispers that were present when she was in the restaurant were louder than usual because everybody was doing it. The events that we saw happening before the crash, such as the decoy car leaving outside the Ritz Hotel, with Henry being instructed to prepare and drive a car outside the rear entrance which would contain Diana and Dodi, was actually true. And even the close-up shot of the drinks that Henry was drinking before the change of plan required him to become the driver was something that was decided by the French authorities that played a part in the crash that occurred. It was said that when the car entered the entrance of the tunnel, it was going at 65 miles per hour, and Henry Paul lost control and ended up hitting into a car. And then, after swerving, the car that Diana was in hit a pillar that was connected to the roof of the tunnel. It was said that Henry was 3 times over France's alcohol limit when it came to being legally able to drive behind the wheel, and the authorities essentially blamed him for the crash which led to Diana's death. One would have to assume that he was driving so fast because of the sheer amount of paparazzi that were on their tail. At least, that's what the show made out. So the shot of Henry drinking, which didn't have that much focus in the show, and the reason that the French officials think the crash happened wasn't directly mentioned. It was only subtly referenced in a shot before the events occurred. I think because there are many different reasons that people think the crash occurred, and a 10-year inquest that took place, they didn't necessarily give a definitive answer. Whilst the French officials did an inquest into Diana's death, the UK officials did one too, which concluded in 2008, over 10 years after Diana's death happened. It was concluded that Diana's death was put down to the negligent driving of Henry, and also by the paparazzi that were following them. This was something that Prince William and Harry agreed and accepted, and Dodi's father accepted as well, even though at the time he had a 10-year campaign that was focused around trying to prove that his son and Diana were killed in a conspiracy. Diana's funeral. During the final episode, we saw that the funeral for Diana took place, and although it wasn't heavily covered in the show, nor does it look like it's going to be covered in part 2 of Season 6, as it seems like that's going to be focused on William meeting Kate. The funeral itself was a massive deal. It was something which drove around 3 million people to London, was watched by 33 million people in the UK, and it was expected to have been seen by around 2.5 billion people in the world, which at the time was just under half of the world's population. It also caused Elton John's Candle in the Wind, which was changed specifically for Diana's funeral, to become the best-selling single in the charts since it began in the 50s, as it had 33 million sales. It would have definitely been good to have seen more focus around the funeral, and also on the societal impact that Diana's death had from a global perspective, rather than just have a short couple of minute segments. The ending explained. The ending of Season 6 Part 1 of The Crown was solely focused on the aftermath that was present following the death of Diana. I think this was actually a really beautiful episode. There were a couple of moments in particular that I thought stood out. The scene where Charles was on the plane and he was face to face with Diana and he was speaking to her even though she was gone, and the reflective, mourned state that he was in took the forefront, and it was actually a hard-hitting scene. The scene with Muhammad where Dodi appeared to him as a vision and he essentially said what he was supposed to say to him on the phone call before he hung up was also a powerful moment too. And finally, the scene where Queen Elizabeth was sat watching the TV and a vision of Diana appeared next to her. That was also a captivating one too. Charles's one definitely hit the most and it tapped into the emotions that one usually feels when going through grief. Hearing how she thanked him for the way that he was in the hospital when he broke down and was a broken individual was quite hard-hitting. Also, hearing how Diana loved Charles so much and so deeply whilst they were both in tears was heartbreaking to watch too. Even the moments of silence where they were just looking at each other after Charles said that he was filled with regret was so powerful. And with it being followed by him being sat there talking to nobody, it made it land with real impact and provided a contrast in how busy his mind was with the thoughts that he had, yet the emptiness that was around him. It was said that Charles was heartbroken by the death of Diana, and as we saw in the episodes that came before it, the sourness that was once a prominent part of their relationship had been put to bed, and they wanted to make a go of things in being successful in divorce. So their relationship had hit a turning point where they were more amicable with each other, hence why I think that scene had such a focus when they were outside the car. The scene with Elizabeth was one that was definitely interesting. It was always a thing that the royals didn't really approve of or get on with Diana following her divorce, and I think that was made quite clear in this episode of the show. Even though the Queen headed back to London from Scotland in order to give her speech to the nation and be the mother of the nation, as Charles put it, it felt like it was done with the intention of protecting the image of the royal family, rather than accompanying the nation whilst it was mourning. Elizabeth even saying, "You've got what you wanted, it's like a revolution." When she had her vision of Diana after she died, it showed how just like in the previous season, that was at the forefront. When the visions occurred, we saw that it was about things that mattered most. For Charles, it was him talking about the regrets that he had about the way that they were. For Muhammad, it was Dodi and the regrets that he had in the expectation that he put upon his shoulders. And for the Queen, it was Diana, and the fact that she'd weakened the public opinion of the royals. With the Queen being on her knees and praying at the end of the episode, it did make me wonder, was she saying a prayer for Diana, or was she praying that the royals' reputation would come out okay from all of this? With the worried look on her face, I have a feeling that it could have been the latter. Overall review. I thought Season 6 Part 1 was very good. I would say that it felt quite rushed, but I thought it was still enjoyable. Most of the season was spent with Diana and Dodi, which made it feel less like The Crown and more like Diana. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do feel like it had a completely different tone and style to the previous seasons. I think the show did a good job at honing in on the build-up to the death of Diana and the mindset that she was most likely in at the time. The high pressure, all eyes on her environment where all she wanted to do was good, but was surrounded by paparazzi and press wanting to make a buck on her relationship. You could sense the pain that she was in from a mental perspective. One thing that I feel this season did, which the others didn't do, was paint Charles in a nicer light. They made him more human and showed that he was actually a happy individual when he was with Camilla. He was focused on love over the crown for a small while, and it was definitely interesting seeing him like that. William and Harry was definitely an interesting casting. William looked the part, but I just feel that the way that his relationship was with Diana was a bit strange in the show. She treated him like how she treated Harry, who looked significantly younger, so that would often take me out of it, as he was 15. As I said, the pacing of the season felt a little off just due to the fact that it was a bit rushed, but at the same time it was concise and it got to what it needed to get to really quickly. I think the rapid pace was also something that tied into the tone of the season, as it was very quick, sharp and snappy, even in terms of the movements that Diana was making, so it didn't feel too disjointed. My one major critique with this season is that I just wish we could have seen more of the characters. Most of the other royals felt like an afterthought, and I know it was specifically focused on the death of Diana, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the other members of the royal family appearing, but maybe that's for part 2. With it looking like we're going to be seeing William in his university years in part 2, I fear it's not going to be half as interesting as what we've been watching, but I guess we'll see with that. What did you think of Season 6 Part 1? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.